Dallas-Fort Worth, this is North Texas in Focus. This show takes a closer look at issues and concerns around the Metroplex. We bring you the show on 88.1 Indy and 881indy.com.
Hi, I'm Matthew Reyna. This is North Texas in Focus. My guest on the program today is David Weigel. He's a political reporter and writer of the newsletter Americana for the digital news startup Semafor. Weigel previously served as a political reporter and writer of the Trailer newsletter for the Washington Post. Weigel travels the country covering campaigns and elections, so I thought there was nobody better to bring on the show to discuss what's happening in Texas in the 2022 midterm elections. I spoke to Weigel on Thursday afternoon, and I started off the discussion by asking him to explain the term "in this house we believe liberalism" that he coined in an article earlier that day about the political environment in Oregon.
Well, that's a very literal phrase. There's a sign that you have probably seen if you're in a certain kind of suburb, most suburbs, which is a black background and rainbow colored lettering. And it says, "In this house we believe," followed by a list of nice sounding, salutary liberal democracy beliefs, gay rights, trans rights, etc. And the trip I took to Portland to report that story, other parts of Oregon, but in Portland especially, you see it a lot. And I was using that as shorthand to convey there is a sort of liberalism, progressivism that's been widely adopted by white liberals, white college educated liberals. And I'm painting with a broad brush, but we're talking about something that campaigns have seen and worried about. That's endorsed a lot of ideas that are not very popular, and a lot of reforms that have not been very popular with your swing voters. And to specify in Oregon, this is ideas like decriminalizing drugs so that you can possess a small amount of mostly anything, a little bit of heroin, a little bit of meth, and that's not a crime because they want to decriminalize drug use. The reforms that have been made to encampments, the right people have to camp on the street without getting arrested for camping, that sort of idea. And you could go further and get into the rights of trans kids, gay representation, LGBT representation in schools, teaching. How would I put it? I don't want to embrace every sort of Republican attack on it, but I'm describing a sort of maybe the ethos of the John Oliver show, right? And there's a lot of worry among Democrats, I think, expressed by people like Marie Teixeira, James Carville, in a little more cartoonish and ready for TV way, that this sort of big-hearted, bleeding heart liberalism, embracing some ideas that have not been very popular, is hurting the party with working class voters. And another example I'd say in Oregon is just the length of school closures. They were closed until really the end of the first school year in 2021. The COVID mask mandate lasted there for a long time. That kind of fits into this. That's sort of the we're all in this together mindset that you see that is very popular in a place like Portland, and then not very popular if you get to more rural parts of Oregon, more working class communities. This in a state where a lot of working class white voters have voted Democratic for a very long time.
And, there was a time where Democrats, especially in the emergence of Donald Trump, thought that, if there was a third party, it would be from the Republican side and would peel off votes from the Trumper types. So I find it kind of interesting that, there's a viable third party in Oregon, but it's against the Democrats and it's hurting the Democrats. Any thoughts on that?
Yes. Yeah, the situation in Oregon is that Betsy Johnson, who is a moderate Democrat, you could call her conservative. She certainly had some conservative views on climate, on some Second Amendment issues. She jumped into this race for governor at the end of 2021 with bipartisan strategists and a campaign that is very kind of personality focused, but also aimed right against what she calls going woke, which she sees epitomized by the Oregon Democratic Party and its nominee Tina Kotek, the former Speaker of the House. mean, she basically everything I was just listing, this bill of grievances that that conservatives often have, which is why is the state regulating all this? Why is it trying to mandate the way I live my life? She has had problems with that, and especially when it comes to crime and homelessness. The argument there is basically that liberals, progressives have been way too permissive. They have allowed far too much homelessness to take place in the streets and to encampments to build. They allowed rioting to go on way too long in Portland and hurt the city's economic viability. Not entirely, but definitely if you're going to Portland's downtown, you can see places that are a lot less busy than they were with less businesses. And that's been her case is, hey, I'm not a social conservative. I am liberal on some things. I feel like the state needs to get turned around, but these left-wing Democrats have gone too far. And that is unique to Oregon. It was interesting because I'm not sure if it will remain unique. You saw with Tulsi Gabbard, who was not really, by the time she left the Democratic Party, popular inside the party. But a lot of the arguments she was making were, I was member of this party for certain reasons, and I have a couple of economically progressive views, but they're so far out there. And she often is positioned against Democrats on war and peace issues, but she's really said they're so far out there on gender identity, on the kind of vision they have for society and the LGBT tolerance. That is her grievance to the party. I've seen a little bit of splintering on that, not too much, but really the most substantive splintering has been around crime. Has been Democrats who say, look, I've been a member of this party forever, but they were much more comfortable in the 90s when Democrats were in favor of gun control and building more prisons and hiring more cops. Less so now when Democrats are still in favor of gun control, but also committed to cashless bail, criminal justice reform, prison reform. Democrats like Johnson have kind of jumped off the vote for that reason.
I did want to shift down to my state, Texas. Is this the year Democrats permanently stop playing in Texas? Or is there some kind of real G's moving silence like lasagna type situation going on?
Well, it's problematic for them because the theory of how Democrats would win Texas was assume the Rio Grande Valley and the Latino voters keep voting Democratic, heavily Democratic. You know, they broke for George W. Bush when they broke back, and then win in cities and suburbs. And they've been winning in cities and suburbs. And I think despite everything, I mean, the Harris County judges race is tight, and you've seen angry Democrats there. But the Latino part of the calculation has become much more complicated. I think they do admit it. They do say that they have. When I talked to Beto O'Rourke the last time, a couple months ago, that he is working diligently in the Rio Grande Valley because he doesn't want people to think they're taking it for granted. But the party has moved on some social issues that are just not popular among conservative Catholics, and that's a lot of Latino voters. It's a lot of people in the Rio Grande Valley. The Democratic Party's national positions, and Beto O'Rourke endorsed some of these when he ran for president, is for versions of border crossing decriminalization, very expansive rights for immigrants, amnesty for immigrants, and criticism of the border control. I mean, I really do think there is a hangover. I've heard about it in Texas from the Biden administration's response to the way they have handled migrants coming over the border, or at least coming to the border seeking asylum since he became president. And then two, specifically, the Del Rio situation and Haitian immigrants trying to get into the country, Border Patrol agents stopping them, and the administration embracing this incorrect idea that they were, I think the president said, strapping the Haitian migrants. There were other Democrats who said on the record they were using whips, and it was really just misreading of photographs of what was happening. I've heard some backlash to that in the Rio Grande Valley. So there are Latinos who really do respect and love the Border Patrol and want a secure border who have drifted. They've drifted on some of the gender issues I mentioned. You also have in the cities some of a backlash to Democrats. I think you saw this in local elections too, over crime, over criminal justice reform, and in the near suburbs, you've seen Republican victories on the in school boards, mostly on those gender issues. A little bit of critical race theory, but I think that's faded. So I don't think the party demographically looks at Texas and says we can't win it. I do think there's a reckoning that did not happen this year. With some ways, the party has moved further left than, let's say, the Barack Obama Democratic Party 2008. That party was just much less exposed on a lot of issues that alienate conservative and moderate voters, and this party is better organized. It has more. It has an advantage in that the Republicans have gone far right and lost a lot of people in suburbs. But it's also moved left in ways that I think are hurting it. And I don't know, in 2024 and 2026, how do they change what the party stands for to win those folks back while they have Republicans accusing them of wanting to defund police and mutilate children? I don't think they've answered that question.
And is that what you describe? Is that particular to the Rio Grande Valley? Because my thought is that someone like Joaquin Castro is going to win his district, mostly Latino district, by 60 points. Veronica Escobar is going to win her district by a lot. Is there something that's maybe just unique to the Rio Grande Valley, the love for the Border Patrol, et cetera, that maybe shouldn't be applied to Latinos across the board in Texas?
Well, I just was talking about the border because that's the issue that you'll hear Democrats talk about. If you're campaigning in the Inland Empire in California and you're a Republican talking about how we need more border patrols and how we need to close the border, that is less popular there. You even saw this in the recall last year. Republicans thought there'd be some gains there were not. In Arizona, still not in. But you're seeing different shifts with Latino voters for different reasons. And so and I was talking to some Democrats yesterday who were trying to isolate this to Florida. Florida, obviously, the Latino population there is a lot of Cuban immigrants, Venezuelan immigrants, people who came to the country, fleeing countries with some money. They had some money, fleeing countries because of the left-wing governments. That's not the case in Texas or Arizona. So what you've seen in Texas is some drifting from party on these border issues and gender and law enforcement. I think you've seen worries about inflation, Democrats' ability to manage the economy more broadly with Latino voters in the other states I mentioned. So I think they've got a bunch of problems that they're trying to solve. They're not in denial about this, especially the economic questions. They're trying to go back to Latino voters and say, look at what we have delivered. Look at the prescription drug reforms we've delivered. Look at the price caps we've delivered. They have some of that, but in any group of more working class voters, that includes working class Latinos, you're going to have people who get bit more when there's 9%, 8% inflation, and that has cost them in a way I don't think they've fixed before they even get to all the other issues.
To you, what's the biggest difference between Beto 2018 and Beto 2022?
It is a more professional campaign, and that's not to malign the 2018 campaign, but out of the gate, the Beto 2018 campaign did not have a pollster. It was really trying to build momentum without much of a strategy. It always had the town halls and it always had the rallies, so that's stayed consistent. But the campaign is a bit more cautious now, and the candidate's more cautious because he had an unpleasant experience running for president. I think elements of it he liked, but he didn't like losing that much. So this campaign is more professional. It's making more concessions to Democrat messaging. It's also more targeted. It is about gun violence. It's about abortion rights. It's about the electric grid. He's tried to stick to those issues, and when Beto has gotten off them, it's usually because Republican tracker is trying to push him, or somebody in a town hall is trying to push him. And so it is a more disciplined campaign. Obviously, it has impressed a lot of national Democrats, even though he's trailed in every poll. This is the sort of more direct race that they think can, in the right circumstances, win in Texas. I mean, it is still close, as dire as things look for Democrats around the country. And if you look at how they're doing in a place like Nevada and a place like Texas, Beto is doing much better than the baseline with that sort of specific targeted campaign. I think he wouldn't have been doing as well if he was a little more slapdash like he was in 2018.
So when I first reached out to you about doing this interview, I checked out your Twitter page. I think it's widely agreed upon that you have one of the more cool Twitter pages out of Washington people. And
okay,
I think among people I talk to, I think it's engaging, it's funny, etc. I don't want to go too deep into that, but when thinking about that, I was thinking how, our people in the media are expected, to have a Twitter presence, some of them good, some of them bad, in between. But they all give it a go. They write their own press. Um, why are we generally okay with the fact that our politicians, our elected officials, we know that they write almost nothing of which bears their name, and that's tweets, Facebook, more
Right.
personal stuff like constituent letters. Why are we okay with that?
Some of them some of them actually are their Twitter personas, or some of them at least write the tweets that are sent out. I think the worry, and it's real, is look, I'm in the media, and I love what we do, and I always am trying to do it in the best possible way. But Bernie Sanders had an expression: "I can come in here and give the most eloquent speech since the Gettysburg Address, and if I fall on a banana peel, you people will write about me falling on a banana peel." Totally correct. And I feel like campaigns take the same approach to Twitter. There is a divergence. And I think Democrats are much more cautious about what sort of fights they engage in, what sort of memes they share. They are now, especially, they were much more cautious after 2020, when a lot of them were kind of caught embracing defund the police messaging. And not to get into all that, that is a very big, separate issue. But they're more careful. Should we endorse this protest? Should we endorse this slogan? Republicans, I think, have gotten a little more bold, especially not just in safe seats, but in swing races, because the engagement you get and the national audience you get by writing your own tweets and really kind of dunking on liberals is super positive. I mean, they really have a great time with it. And I'm thinking of Blake Masters. I'm thinking of Ted Cruz. Cruz at this point gets criticism from people who think, like, do you want to be a senator or do you want to have a podcast? So there are different approaches. I think there is caution from these candidates because they don't want to have a news story be all about some dashed off thing that they approved or that they read or some staffer wrote. But I think Republicans are a little more bold about getting into fights, and Democrats have gotten a lot more circumspect.
But even the ones like the Republicans that do get into fights and whatnot, I think I think my main point is that we all know that there's a staffer that wrote it. Whether both ways, there's a staffer that writes it, and in a way where that wouldn't be acceptable from a media member, from almost anyone else except for maybe a corporation's page. We're okay with our elected officials not writing anything, not nothing of which bears their name. We assume they don't write it. Maybe I'm chasing a rabbit on this one.
Oh, I see what you're asking about, but you're right. Yeah, there's a lot of this. There's brand accounts, there's political accounts. There are accounts where somebody has shaped it to not get into trouble. But I don't feel like they succeed. I feel like the accounts I'm talking about, that what campaigns like to do is have enough of a real personality and enough like brio and I think boldness in how they attack Democrats. Like they benefit from that. So I think they've gotten a little bit bolder. But yeah, you're right that, like, this is usually censored. You're not seeing actual politicians talk. You're seeing press releases from these people most of the time. It's the equivalent of them reading from a speech more than them kind of going off the cuff.
And most of those press releases probably written by other people for the most part, staffers.
For the most part, I mean, they pay them to do that, so they don't have to. I mean, it's pretty risky for a lot of these guys to do their own media. I mean, I only see that anymore with members in super safe districts where they can't do anything wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see the time ticking down. So let me ask you this. This show is hosted on a college radio station. To me, you have one of the coolest jobs. You go from city to city, you dive in with the local movers and shakers, you see what's happening on the ground. I just want to see if you can tell some of our listeners how you got this cool job, how you got on this journey.
Well, I always wanted to do this for a living, really, since high school. I wanted to be in journalism. I think specifically covering politics. I wasn't super romantic about politics, like I wanted to be the next Hunter Thompson or something. It was more that I was interested in just how things worked and just how life is in all parts of the country, parts of the world, and said, okay, well, there's a job that lets you go and do that. You have a pass to ask people questions and show up to things. And so I was interested in it, and I went through a few jobs. I found there is for as much media as there is, there are not that many people in a given day, unless somebody's in a huge cloud of scandal, not many people who are calling them and saying, what's going on? Like, what's your opinion on this? There are a lot of people who, especially on the right, who might say they hate the media, but what they really hate is stuff being written that doesn't go back and quote them, or stuff that they think quotes like some expert, but doesn't quote another perspective. And so I just kind of jumped in. I was for some smaller outlets. I was at Bloomberg or the Washington Post. I'm at like a startup now that wants to be a larger outlet at some point. And the thing, I just would figure out what I'm interested in, contact 5 or 6 campaigns, or if it's a campaign story, or some legislators, if it's about a state legislature, and I'd go and I'd talk to them, and I'd turn around. And so I was lucky enough for most of my career. I mean, companies will, expense some things. I've always been pretty cheap. I've never been one of those people who needs to stay in the nicest hotel in town. I like to stay in a little Hampton Inn off of the interstate and park for free for $100 instead of staying somewhere for $300. I always would cut costs, and because I wanted to see as much as possible, and I wanted to see, a better representation of how people live. Most people don't live in the vicinity of the nice Ritz-Carlton downtown. So I just did that, and I covered different beats. But my thing with every beat was, I want to cover this where, one, everyone who reads it knows what's happening and learn something. Okay, this is what the scene was at that event. This is what this candidate stands for. This is what this bill is about.
You're listening to North Texas in Focus on 88.1 Indy or 881indy.com. If you have something you'd like to hear addressed on a future show, or any questions, you can send email to info@881indy.com. That's info@881indy.com.
I'd like to thank today's guest, David Weigel. You can follow him on Twitter at David Weigel, or subscribe to his Americana newsletter at Semafor.com. That's it for today's program. For KNTU's North Texas in Focus, I'm Matthew Reyna.
This has been North Texas in Focus on 88.1 Indy and 881indy.com. If you have questions or information to share with us, you can send email to info@881indy.com. Thanks for listening.